Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Issy Lepowski. I'm a senior reporter at Protocol, and I am joined here today by Thomas Hughes, who is director of the Facebook Oversight Board, which just hours ago announced its decision to sort of uphold the ban on President Trump, at least for now. The board has asked Facebook to go back and revisit its decision about President Trump's account and come back with a new decision in 6 months, which is something I didn't necessarily see coming, but something I'm really interested to talk to Thomas about. So Thomas, thank you so much for joining us on what I know is a very, very busy day.
That's a pleasure, and Issy, thank you very much for the invitation.
Of course. And for anybody watching at home, if you have any questions for us, for Thomas, feel free to tweet at #protocolpolicy, and I will try to answer them. So let's dive in, and I want to start with a little table setting to begin with. So as director of the Oversight Board, Thomas, you are not personally one of the board members who makes these decisions or deliberates on these decisions, but you do oversee the processes and how everything comes together. So as something of a bystander and as a human rights expert yourself, right, that's how you landed in this position. How do you feel about the decision the board made, or lack thereof?
I feel very good about the decision. I think it's a strong decision. I think it's a decision that clearly prioritizes freedom of expression and other human rights as well. And I think it's a decision that speaks to the need to empower users and to make sure that their voice is heard. And the reasons I think that are because obviously the board found that the suspension of former President Donald Trump was essentially necessary to keep people safe. And that his actions did encourage and legitimize violence, and that it was certainly a severe violation. But at the same time, a rejection of the indefinite nature of that suspension as a penalty, that was both arbitrary, but also a failure on Facebook's side to apply rules that are clear and consistent and transparent. And this is a very important component of freedom of expression. Users must be able to understand what the penalties are, what the implications are. They must be empowered to have knowledge of the implications around the decisions that they take in terms of content, and they must know about what's going to happen subsequently if they post different types of content. So as you've pointed out, within 6 months, and I would stress it's within 6 months rather than at 6 months, but within 6 months, the board has said you must go back, and an indefinite suspension is not proportionate. It is not consistent with international human rights and freedom of expression principles, and you've got to look at issues like the prospect of future harm and the severity of the violation, and you need to again apply a penalty. But at the same time, what the board has said is you need to think about the construct of what community standards and your content moderation looks like in the future. You need to consider the fact that vague and arbitrary rules obviously have a potentially chilling effect on speech, but you also need to take into consideration the importance of the fact that individuals have the right to hear political speech, and the fact also that influential users and political leaders should be treated in an equal manner in terms of the application of the community standards and the types of penalties that they face, but in recognition of the fact that context is extremely important, and political leaders have a greater voice and therefore have a bigger impact. And therefore, the recommendations very clearly say, if you suspend a political leader or an influential user in the future for something that may be, incitement to violence or discrimination or lawless action, all of which are well recognized, legitimate restrictions around expression, you need to apply a harms test. You need to say when those risks have receded, that is the right moment in order to bring that user back onto the platform. And that needs to be transparent, and it needs to be set against public rules which all users can understand.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So when the board agreed to take up the case in January, it said in its announcement, and I'm quoting here, that the board would determine whether Mr. Trump's suspension from access to Facebook and Instagram for an indefinite amount of time is overturned. And so when I first read that and I saw the decision, I thought, well, the board didn't do that. It didn't overturn the decision. But then I reread it and realized that the language is actually pretty specific. And the board specified that you were going to rule on whether the indefinite suspension was overturned, which I guess it kind of did, because the board has said an indefinite suspension is not appropriate here. It's just now up to Facebook as whether to make it permanent. So did the board know all along when it took up this case that it was going to be ruling on the indefinite nature of the ban? I mean, were we kind of fooling ourselves that we thought we were going to get a permanent ruling one way or another? And if that wasn't the board's intention the whole time, when did it become clear that this was going to be the way they ruled?
Well, it's not possible for the board to sort of preemptively game out what the outcome of a deliberation process is. It involves, a panel of 5 board members, and then it goes back to the full board, and there's comments and review. So we're never certain what a final decision would look like. But the original question that was asked by Facebook, yes, that was put on the Oversight Board's website at the very beginning, and when we canvassed and requested for public comments, we listed out a number of sub questions to those, around what are the specific issues relating to political leaders, how do users consider newsworthiness, and so on and so forth. So all of that was framed and understood from the start. But there's really kind of, when you think about the protection of human rights, there are really kind of two angles, 2 components to it. One is the substantive issues. One is how should a policy be applied? What is the right standard that should be applied in terms of the community standards? But the other is, what is the procedural element there that has human rights implications? And the board has spoken to both of those issues. It said, look, procedurally, this was you failed. This was arbitrary. An indefinite suspension is not consistent with international human rights standards. We acknowledge that the violation was severe. We acknowledge that the decision that was taken on the day was appropriate for that moment, but the indefinite nature of it was not consistent with international human rights standards. So it needs to be redone. But at the same time, has said, looking to the future, when you consider what the longer term looks like, in this case, but also, very importantly, in other cases that come up in the future, including other influential users and political leaders elsewhere in the world, here's some very specific recommendations of how you should consider those cases. What type of, what you've got to consider, what length of time is appropriate. You've got to consider, if you're going to impose a penalty, what's the severity level that would accompany that? You've got to make that clear. If you're going to look at trying to measure, incitement to discrimination and violence and lawless action, what is the test that you will apply? And there's a 6-factor test that's spelt out in the decision as well. So all of that is quite specific and quite clear.
Mm-hmm. I guess I'm just interested a little bit more in how the board came to this decision. One challenge that's different here than with, the real Supreme Court, you don't get to read a full dissent. And so the 5-member panel makes their decision, they circulate it to the rest of the members for a majority, but we don't get to really read the dissent. So I guess I'm wondering to what extent the board's decision to put this back on Facebook had to do with an inability to get a majority consensus on whether to issue a permanent ban or not.
No, not at all. The decision-making process itself, and I'm happy to say a little bit more about that in a second. But this particular decision is a consensus decision, and there are minority opinions written into the decision. So you can see where a minority of the panel wanted to push in a slightly different direction, and that's part of our process, part of the deliberative process, that minority opinions can be reflected. And again, happy to talk in a second a little bit more about some of those minority opinions. But the panel and the board, by extension, was quite clear on the outcome, and these kind of two tracks, as it were, almost that the decision has. One looking at the procedural process and the human rights implications around the procedural issues, and one looking at the substantive issues and again the human rights implications around what kind of policies are applied.
Right. So a theme throughout the decision is that, Facebook basically applied this policy in an ad hoc manner, that it did not have a written policy around indefinite suspensions. And when I read that, I understand the rationale and why, Facebook should have to explain its rules to users, because users have to abide by Facebook's rules. It should go both ways. At the same time, I see how Facebook is this sort of unprecedentedly huge platform with 3 billion users, they are, of course, facing new challenges for which they have not written rules every day, many, many times a day around the world in many languages. Is it really reasonable to hold Facebook to a standard where they cannot adapt their rules in real time in situations where there is a grave threat at hand?
Yes, it's entirely reasonable. And the reason I say that is because the board is not saying to Facebook, you can't evolve your community standards. You can't, adapt them as new issues start to arise. What they're saying is, particularly in this case, is that looking at the penalties and looking at the standard that was applied in that particular moment in time, there was a lack of procedural fairness, transparency, and consistency in that there were rules available to Facebook at that time that should have been sufficient, and that they did not apply them. Instead, potentially, but of course the board is not necessarily making an opinion on this, political, commercial, economic factors come into play. And the less transparency you have, the less consistency you have around those rules, the more difficult it is to measure what the decision making actually was. What were the drivers? Was it principles? Was it standards? Or were there other factors available? So it's very much in Facebook's interest to make sure that they make it clear that there is consistency and it is about standards. The other thing I would mention is that the board looks at the application of the community standards and also Facebook's values, and this goes back to a little bit to your early question about sort of the deliberative process. But it also considers international human rights standards. Now, they are also an evolving body, as it were, of soft law and reports by rapporteurs and other sorts of standards. But those apply. Those are issues that that can be drawn from and are drawn from by the board. And there's no reason why, if those exist in the offline world, why Facebook cannot have community standards to be applied in the online world.